Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is a deal worth $10 billion, and it's between Russia and Iran. In the deal, Moscow will deliver T-90 tanks, artillery systems, planes, helicopters to Tehran, a senior Russian senator said, and it was reported on Russian news. Viktor Azarov, head of the Defense and Security Committee in the Russian Upper House of Parliament, or Federation Council as it's also called, told reporters that talks on the potential deal began during a parliamentary visit to Iran. Also, in another move to bolster Iran's military, Iran and China signed a deal to enhance cooperation between the two nations. So Russia and China are involved in big military deals with Iran. The military agreement between Tehran and Beijing entails increased bilateral training, cooperation, and closer alignment on what the Iranian regime sees as regional security issues. The move represents a, quote, upgrade in long-term military and defense cooperation with China, unquote. Iran's Tasnim news quoted Defense Minister Hussein Dukhan. He said this in a joint press conference in Tehran alongside his Chinese counterpart, General Chang Wangquan. Remember, China and Russia signed the now infamous nuke deal. The purpose of the deal was to bring Iran off the brink of nuclear technology and weapons. Russia and China, along with the United States, Britain, France, Germany, all signed the deal to curb Iran's nuclear program in return for the easing of Western sanctions after years of standoff and growing fears in the West that Iran was seeking to develop nuclear weapons. These new moves by Iran, China, and Russia are happening because they are efforts to boost the Iranian military establishment as the world watches United States President-elect Donald Trump's pledge to scrap the nuclear deal between Iran and the world powers. Trump's upset in the U.S. presidential election cracks open pressing strategic and economic questions in U.S.-China ties and has likely surprised and worried Chinese leaders. The Chinese value stability in relations with the United States and everything. They do not take kindly to change. Meanwhile, Russia has said it is ready to work fast to repair relations with Washington now that Trump has been elected. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov was quoted as saying that authorities in Moscow knew little of Trump's policy plans and recognized that there was a difference between his election campaign pledges and the policies he would implement once in office. Rybakov said Russia's support for the Iran nuclear deal was unchanged, despite Trump's campaign statements that if elected, his priority would be to dismantle the pact. Interfax News reported it's clear that Trump thinks Iran is the cause of instability in the region, and giving them advanced weapons would not be helpful. The nascent deal would further cement an alliance between Moscow and Tehran that is likely to prove a major stumbling block for any rapprochement between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, who has vowed to rip up the nuclear deal with Iran that the Kremlin supports. Quote, these talks are ongoing. The ground has been prepared. The portfolio amounts to around $10 billion, unquote, said Viktor Azarov, an MP who heads the Security and Defense Committee in the Federation Council, Russia's upper house. He told Russian reporters this during a trip to Tehran. He gave few details about the order, but said it would include Russia's mainstay tank, the T-90. It was in March 2015, by the way, when the United Nations partially lifted the embargo on sales to Iran following the conclusion of that landmark agreement to limit Tehran's nuclear capabilities. However, the short version of the agreement that was made public clearly states until 2020, deliveries of even conventional weapons must be approved by the United Nations Security Council, which could present a hurdle to any new contract. Obviously, the U.S. and its allies will block these deliveries, but we will continue these talks, Mr. Azarov said. The new sale comes after Russia delivered the long-promised S-300 air defense systems to Iran. The S-300 is a sophisticated anti-air missile. It's not the best in the world, but it's very good. Moscow had originally promised to sell the S-300 back in 2007 to Iran, but froze the sale under pressure from the West in 2010 when the embargo made it illegal to provide the weapons. Iran actually brought Russia to the World Court for not delivering those weapons. Vladimir Putin ordered the sale to go ahead after the interim agreement was signed last year, and the first complete units were delivered in August. Mr. Azarov said all Iran's S-300 units will be battle-ready in situ by the end of the year. Russia and Iran have a troubled historical past, but have emerged as de facto allies on a number of issues in recent years. The two countries fight side by side in Syria, where both countries have deployed highly trained troops in support of Bashar al-Assad's government. The alliance could put the Kremlin on a collision course with Mr. Trump, the U.S. president-elect, who has described the nuclear framework agreement as, quote, the worst deal ever negotiated, unquote, and vowed to rip it up. Sergei Vrebikov, the deputy foreign minister, said that Russia's support for the Iran deal has, quote, has not changed, unquote, indicating that it would oppose any attempt to renegotiate it. Russia has increased arms sales around the world in recent years as it seeks to earn foreign currency and support potential allies in its confrontation with the West. A year ago, it signed a $2 billion contract to deliver 24 advanced Su-35 jets to China, ending a decade-long unofficial moratorium on sales of high-tech weaponry to Beijing because of fears of technology piracy. The first 4 jets are expected to be delivered by the end of this year. Meanwhile, Iran and China announced an agreement to hold joint military drills and cooperate in fighting terrorism. General Hussein Dagan, the Iranian defense minister, and Chang Wang-Kwan, his Chinese counterpart, signed an agreement on closer military ties. Iranian state television covered the signing live, along with numerous other news reports about the agreement. In addition to the joint military training, Iranian TV said that China would seek to create a collective movement to confront this threat of terrorism. Iran is up to some other games that may provide them with much more needed cash. Iranian investors are pouring money into Kish, the island in the Persian Gulf, hoping its white sand beaches and coral reefs and more relaxed Islamic rules could make it a major tourism destination. From the pristine beaches of Kish, it's only 120 miles to Dubai. Iran hopes to lure Dubai's tens of thousands of wealthy expats as investors and tourists. The wide palm tree-lined boulevards that circle the island of 100 square kilometers or 40 square miles are full of top-end cars, including luxury American models. Buildings are modern, hotels comfortable, and new shopping centers are sprouting up everywhere. Diners pack late-night rooftop restaurants. Women sit with cigarette in hand, wearing colorful headscarves, pushing right back, and reveal plenty of makeup and expensive hairdos. During the day, men walk the long jetties in Bermuda shorts, forbidden in most parts of Iran. Under the warm autumn sun, men can even walk around shirtless. Imagine motorboats, techno music blaring, with men and women sitting together. In many ways, it looks as if little has changed since the days when the Shah and his family holidayed here before the Islamic Revolution in 1979. The green and white cars of the morality police are rarely seen on the island of Kish. Still, even though Islamic rules are less strict on Kish, they are still in force, creating a major obstacle for investors hoping to attract Western expats for short breaks from Dubai. There are no bars or clubs or any alcohol at all. Men and women must use separate beaches, splitting up families. It is actually called halal tourism. Musad Gilani, an investment consultant who divides his time between Dubai and Kish, tries to point out an optimistic spin on the issue. He says, expats can drink and enjoy themselves in Dubai and relax here. Rather hopefully, he says this, Iran is in the midst of a tourism boom, thanks to the efforts of the current moderate government under President Hassan Rouhani to build ties with the West. Visitor numbers have leapt from 2.2 million in the year 2009 to 5.2 million in 2015, and the government says an even bigger increase is expected this year. But most Westerners are drawn by Iran's ancient cities and historical treasures rather than a beach break. Ali Jarafti, one of the managers of Kish's free trade zone, recognizes the island's best hope is to focus on Muslim holidaymakers. The priority is, quote, high-end halal tourism, unquote, he said. Kish already attracts some 1.8 million visitors every year, mostly Tehranis, hoping to escape not just social strictures, but also the horrendous traffic and the pollution of the capital. Shopping is another big draw. Kish is the first and most significant of the 7 free trade zones set up in the 1990s to attract investment and help with import of consumer goods. There are now some 40 hotels, and U.S.-style malls are popping up everywhere. The company also wants to double the number of international flights by Kish Air and create a car-free ecological paradise on the nearby island, Hendorabi, where an airport, port, and hotel have already been built. Investors are pushing health tourism, with 2 top-end hospitals already running on the island, boasting leading doctors, particularly plastic surgeons. They are hoping that it too will become a center for medical tourism, where people come to have the special surgeries and then rest. Coming up, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. I'm only going to deal with one column today. It is enormously valuable and deep and speaks to an issue of great importance. The piece is from the New York Times and is dated November 14th, 2016. It's not about news or policy or the Middle East. It's a column by Leon Wieseltier, and it's his eulogy for his dear friend, Leonard Cohen. The loss of Leonard Cohen is beyond description. The Hebrew press and much of the English press around the world dedicated numerous columns and articles to his life and death. The Hebrew press in Israel continued to print stories for days and even weeks after his death. Leonard Cohen was a balladeer. He was a poet and a songwriter. He was, more than anything else, a person who gave expression to human instincts of pain and love, while at the same time was an ardent supporter of Israel. He visited often, and he performed there frequently. The Palestinian Authority once issued a boycott against Leonard Cohen, against his concerts in Israel and around the world. Cohen responded by trying to organize a free concert in Ramallah. He tried, but the PA, after he pushed hard to succeed, they just said no and would not permit it. Wieseltier was Cohen's friend. Leon Wieseltier, by the way, is one of the greatest political observers and polemicists alive today. He was the literary editor of The New Republic for decades. Through its heyday and today, Wieseltier is the Isaiah Berlin Senior Fellow in Culture and Policy at the Brookings Institute, and he's the author of Kaddish. Here is how Wieseltier begins. Dear Uncle Leonard, the email from the boy began. Did anything inspire you to create Hallelujah? Later, the same winter day, the reply arrived. I wanted to stand with those who clearly see God's wholly broken world for what it is, and still find the courage or the heart to praise it. You don't always get what you want. You're not always up for the challenge. But in this case, it was given to me, for which I am deeply grateful. The question came from my son, who was preparing to present the most irresistible hymn of our time to his 5th grade class and required a clarification about its meaning. The answer came from the author of the song, who was for 25 years my precious friend and comrade of spirit. Leonard Cohen was the most beautiful man I have ever known. Wieseltier then tries to convey to the reader a sense of who Cohen was, not just a poet and a songwriter, but a human being. He continues, his company was quickening in every way. The elegance and seductiveness were the least of it. The example of his poise was overwhelming. More an achievement than a disposition, and much more than an affair of style. He lived in a weather of wisdom, which he created by seeking it rather than by finding it. He swam in beauty because in its transience, He aspired to discern a glimpse of eternity. There was always a trace of philosophy in his sensuality. He managed to combine a sense of absurdity with a sense of significance, a genuine feat. He was hospitable and strict, sweet and deep, humble and grand, probing and tender, a friend of melancholy, but an enemy of gloom, a voluptuary with religion, a renegade enamored of tradition. Leonard was, above all, in his music and in his poems and in his tone of life, a lyrical advocate of the finite and the flawed. As he wrote to my son, who was mercifully too young to understand, he was possessed by a lasting sensation of brokenness. He was broken, love was broken, the world was broken. Wieseltier then describes the depth of Cohen and how he was dark and yet uplifting at the same time, culminating using one of his greatest songs, Hallelujah. Leonard had an unusual inflection for darkness. He found in it an occasion for uplift. His work is animated by a laudatory impulse, an unexpected and profoundly moving hunger to praise the world in full view of it. His attitude of acceptance was not founded on anything as cheap as happiness. Leonard sang always as a sinner. He refused to describe sin as a failure or a disqualification. Sin was a condition of creatureliness, and his feeling for our creatureliness was boundless. Even though it all went wrong, I'll stand before the Lord of song with nothing on my tongue but hallelujah. Wieseltier showed that Cohen's attitude toward failure was what made his work so good and nearly perfect. The singer's faults do not expel him from the divine presence. Instead, they confer a mortal integrity upon his exclamation of praise. He is the inadequate man, the lowly man, the hurt man who has given hurt, insisting modestly but stubbornly, except in I'm Your Man, when he merrily mocked himself, upon his right to a sacred exaltation. Wieseltier is no stranger to arguments with God and about God. He shows that Cohen's arguments were both simple and profound. Leonard wrote and sung often about God, but I'm not sure what he meant by it. Whatever it was inspired. If It Be Your Will, his most exquisite song, he sought recognition for his fallenness, not rescue from it. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. He once told an interviewer that those words were the closest he came to a credo. The teaching could not be more plain. Fix the crack, lose the light. How profound. And yet Cohen was not depressed. He was hopeful. Wieseltier begins the wind down with some very insightful and personal messages from notes that Cohen wrote him over the years. While he was genuinely earnest about the pursuit of truth, Leonard had a supremely unsanctimonious temperament. Whether or not darkness was to be relieved by light, it was to be relieved by lightness. Before Passover, which commemorates the biblical Exodus, he sent this: Dear bro, happy Pesach. I miss Egypt. Love and blessings, Eliezer. Before Shavuot, which commemorates the giving of the Torah in the desert, he sent this: Dear bro, see you at Sinai. I'll be wearing headphones. Love and blessings, Eliezer. The laughter and the disabused was yet another of his gifts. Eliezer was his Hebrew name. We sometimes read and studied together Lorca and Midrash, Eluard and Buddhist scriptures, and Kavafi. We could get quite Talmudic, especially with wine. In Judaism, there is a custom to honor the dead by pondering a text in their memory. Here, in memory of Eliezer ben Nisan HaKohen, is a passage on frivolity by a great rabbi in Prague at the end of the 16th century. A man was born for toil, since his perfection is always being actualized, but is never actual. He observed in an essay on frivolity, and insofar as he attains perfection, something is missing in him. Perfection, as Cohen would say, is imperfect. Wieseltier hammers his point home with a marvelous conclusion. Wieseltier concludes, in such a being, perfection is a shortcoming, and Leonard Cohen was the poet laureate of the lack. The psalmist of the privation, who made imperfection gorgeous. This is how essays once were written in the New York Times. They had depth, beauty, and style, and made you think and feel. Yehi Zichro Baruch. May his memory be a blessing for all of us. I will not forget Leonard Cohen. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. Just to prove my point, 2 of the 3 cartoons I selected today are about Leonard Cohen's death. To understand this and the significance, one must realize that Leonard Cohen's death coincided with the US presidential elections, and there was a huge amount of material to draw upon, that's my pun, by the way, with Trump's victory and the massive political upset. Cartoonists from all over the world and all over the country, nonetheless, still drew about Leonard Cohen. This first cartoon is from Wisconsin, from the Green Bay Gazette, and it was published on November 12, 2016. It's drawn by Joe Heller. The caption is a verse from the Cohen song, Hallelujah. I'll stand before the Lord of song with nothing on my tongue but Hallelujah. And then it reads, Leonard Cohen, 1934 to 2016. The second cartoon is from Omaha, Nebraska, by Jeff Koterba, and published on November 11, 2016, in the Omaha World Herald. The image is unmistakably Leonard Cohen, guitar case in hand, in the wind and the snow and the rain, with the stars. Again, the cartoon quotes a verse from a song. We are so small between the stars, so large against the sky. Leonard Cohen. It's remarkable. The final piece, though, is by Dana Summers. I so enjoy his wit. Summers encapsulates all of our feelings in this cartoon. A man is sitting in a straitjacket on the floor of a padded room when the doctor opens the door and sticks in his head and says, "You can come out now, the campaign is over." I would have added the word finally. It's finally over. The election is finally over, and we can finally get back to normal. I'm hoping there will be exciting new cartoons that are not about the election as we move ahead in the coming weeks. In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. Iran once again violated the OPEC agreement. This is upsetting Saudi Arabia more than anyone else. Iran is a member of OPEC and has agreed to their production quotas. The purpose of production quotas is to keep the price of oil as high as possible without creating a crisis that would stimulate research for new alternatives than fossil fuels. Iran has begun producing about 250,000 barrels from the Karun River Valley, up from 65,000. President Rouhani says that productions in the valley should reach 1 million barrels per day as soon as possible. He says oil production in the west of Karun must reach 1 million barrels per day, Rouhani said. This is a realistic goal, and we need investment and technology. This will be a massive change in Iran's production, and there is no doubt that the increase in oil will have 2 effects. More cash will flow into Iran, and the price of oil will drop. And once again, Iran is violating another agreement. This time, it's the nuclear agreement. This time, they're violating the agreement at the very moment that they were warning President-elect Trump not to walk back the famous nuke agreement. This information comes from the Associated Press. The AP saw a copy of a secret UN report by the IAEA stating that Iran has recently exceeded their agreed-upon heavy water limit, which was 143.3 metric tons. Iran went over by 0.10 metric tons. The significance of this is enormous. Heavy water is an essential component of the refining plutonium for use in nuclear technology. Reports of these violations are few and far between. That's because few people want to harp on the inadequacies of the agreement and the policing process of that agreement. This is just one example. Like so many others, this violation went without notice. This was not the first violation, and worse still, it will not be the last. The other day, World Nuclear News published an announcement that Kazakhstan and Saudi Arabia have signed a nuclear pact. Saudi Arabia has plans to create 300 nuclear facilities over the next few years. And the agreement with Kazakhstan is a huge component of the larger picture because Kazakhstan sits on 12% of the world's uranium. Together with Russia, which will enrich the uranium, Saudi Arabia can create nuclear material that will enable them to create nuclear plants. Saudi Arabia has already had the nuclear deals with Argentina, France, China, Finland, Hungary, Indonesia, Russia, and South Korea. This agreement with Kazakhstan puts Saudi Arabia squarely on the nuclear map. The World Health Organization has awarded Israel the honor of being the country with the best disaster relief system in the world. Israeli field hospitals are now ranked the best in the world. The World Health Organization said that Israel has a unique ability to deploy large and fully outfitted medical teams with field hospitals at seconds' notice and travel all over the world. The WHO evaluated Israel's teams as highly skilled. People who monitor Israel and people who monitor world catastrophe know full well the grand and spectacular role Israel plays. This is not an award. It's an honest evaluation. The truth is that whenever there is a world crisis, Israel volunteers and is almost always welcome. Israel saves lives and teaches others how to save lives. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that Jews recite Kaddish to memorialize their loved ones? Kaddish means to sanctify. There are 4 types of Kaddish in Jewish prayer. The Kaddish functions in Jewish prayer as a divider between parts of the service. The 4 types include 1, the Reader's Kaddish, which is also known as the full Kaddish and the Kaddish Titkabel. It's said at the end of a reader's section. 2, the half Kaddish, which separates important sections of the service. 3, the Rabbi's Kaddish, which is said after a portion of study. And 4, there's a Kaddish which is only said at a gravesite, as well as said only after finishing an entire tractate of Talmud. The Kaddish is a prayer that doesn't mention death at all. It's not about death. It's about proclaiming glory and exclaiming God's great name, Shemei Rabbah. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.